Good evening and welcome to State of the Nation on the finest television, KBN TV. I'm your presenter as always, Kennedy Mambwe. Tonight we are looking at the opposition leaders under political persecution. Is that the correct reading into what's happening in Zambia, or indeed it is just something that is happening coincidentally as we are running towards general elections on the 13th of August 2026. Now, my guest on the show tonight is the Tonse Alliance presidential candidate, who is also the Member of Parliament for Mporokoso, that is Honorable Brian Mundubile. You may be aware, or you may recall, that within a very short space of time, he's been arrested twice. Now, we understand he recently escaped an alleged abduction. Could this be political? Could this just be a matter of criminality that is taking place in our nation? We will get to find out more from this discussion with Honorable Brian Mundubile. Please welcome to State of the Nation tonight.
Thank you, Doc. I'm happy to be here tonight.
Thank you so much.
It's a good evening to all the viewers.
Wonderful. It's good to have you, and we were worried when we heard that you probably had gone into hiding. Let's start from there. What could have triggered that?
Well, of course, starting with the time that I was stopped at the airport, where my passport and phones were confiscated and later detained at IBEX-Hill. I think that information is out there in public. We were later told that there had been a report at Woodlands Police to do with a statement that I made, I think upon my release from IBEX-Hill, and that the police were out there looking for me. As a law-abiding citizen, I was waiting for a call-out so that we could present ourselves at the police. That never came. What we saw were unusual movements of strange vehicles around my official residence, indeed the offices, and every other place that I would be found. We were obviously suspicious because our security noticed these were the same vehicles, of course, changing from one point to the other, to a point where at some point, I think on a Good Friday, they attempted to stop our vehicle, some three gentlemen who had arrived in some white Subaru vehicle with tinted windows, waylaid us at some gate and attempted to actually stop our vehicle. Yeah, so it's indeed a very serious concern to us that in this day and age, people would want to resort to violence of that nature, arising for mere political contestation. Yeah.
So you reckon this could be linked to your aspiration to contest for presidency, or do you reckon that could just be coincidence? Maybe this could be, criminal elements? What are your thoughts around this?
You cannot isolate these events, as it were. If you look at the conduct of the police or the law enforcement agencies at the airport, they acted outside the law to start with. The whole fiasco, the whole drama was not within the confines of the law. The searches that they conducted, both on the phones and indeed the confiscation of the passport, was done without any warrant or indeed any arrest. And you follow the story of what transpired when we go to Woodlands. I was detained without any formal arrest, and the statement was only obtained from me the very next morning. So these are not isolated events, and there are many other reports for security reasons that we haven't made. And we have not made these reports officially because it's the same police that have been acting unlawfully in many cases. So as a citizen, where do you go? It's the same police that conduct an illegal search at the airport, It's the same police that detain you in these police cells without any arrest, but you're also expected to report unusual movements and security concerns around your residence and offices to the same police. So that's the situation we find ourselves in.
That's a very interesting point that you raise, Honorable Mundubile, because earlier in the day, we published, I think, an interview you had with our media house, earlier in the morning, and most comments on the page were to the effect that, why haven't you reported this incident? So you sort of come out now and paint a picture that you seem to have lost confidence in our law enforcement agencies. Is that the correct reading?
I will say that without any hesitation, really, because the question that I ask, to whom do I report? For you to report to the police is because you believe the police are going to do something to protect the citizens. Now, if the police are in the forefront of victimizing and persecuting the same citizen, how do you surrender yourself to the same police?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, from a human interest perspective, you are a high-profile figure. You are vying for the highest office in the land, and suddenly, based on your allegation, your life is in danger, and you decided to go into hiding. How is the situation looking at the moment that you are out now?
No, you see, PK, of course, even hiding is in inverted commas. My decision to compete for presidency arises for the need to serve the Zambian people. The risks that have arisen as a result of that decision would not stop me from pursuing this particular objective of ensuring that we go to an election this year in August, compete on a level playing field, and be able to serve the Zambian people. It's very, very important. I want to speak to the Zambian people. The decision that I made to stand for presidency is to serve the Zambian people. Of course, we have to take certain measures, certain steps to secure ourselves, but not to stay away or cow down into hiding away from the people. So, yes, we noticed movements that were unusual. It was very clear that criminal elements, whether they were criminal elements in uniform or criminal elements within certain political parties, were pursuing us. We took measures, we put up measures to ensure that we remain safe, but not to stay away, from meeting our members, for instance, speaking to our supporters, ensuring that we continue with the fight to fight for the Zambian people. So this is something that everyone today who vies for office in Zambia has got to come to terms with. We have a government that does not fully appreciate what a constitutional democracy entails. In a constitutional democracy, there are two things that come out very clearly. Number one is contestation. Number two should be the protection of human rights. That is a perfect constitutional democracy. In this particular case, in the case of Zambia, when you put yourself out for leadership, the current government, President Hichilema's government, begins to view you as an enemy. Not as a contender, not as a competitor, but as an enemy. Otherwise, how would you explain the recent activities? Number one, they've confiscated my passport. They've taken away my phones without any good reason. Even the charges that they would like to level against me, okay, it will have nothing to do with the passport and the phones. You know very well, PK, that my dear brother, President Hichilema, even when he faced capital and grave charges of treason, he still had his passport. The government then did not take his passport away. Okay? His freedom of movement was preserved. He was still able to go and take interviews, speak to BBC and all these other people. What good explanation, therefore, will anybody give for confiscating that passport?
Would you think that you should expect a level playing field given the current circumstances? Would you be able to compete favorably and freely?
Come again?
In the current prevailing circumstance and situation that you've described, as a contender to President Hichilema, are you expecting the miracle of a free and fair election where you will participate freely, or what you are facing might actually heighten as we go towards the election?
Well, it's very clear that there will never be a level playing field. Where we are now, PK, Vice President Mutena Lumango is all over the country, you know, with helicopters, busy campaigning. They were in Chama, they were in Wapula, they're everywhere. On the other hand, they will not allow BM8, Brian Mundubile with his team, to even attend the church service in Chingola. The whole church, the church premises were surrounded by police. All the CDF Land Cruisers were in Chingola that day. But in the meantime, their own members are all over the country campaigning, including the Vice President. So if you have a scenario like that, where only UPND can campaign, for the past 5 years, there's been no opposition, maybe except for one or two political parties that have been able to hold their rallies. For the past 5 years, there's been no political rallies. That's unheard of. And yet, President Hichilema at the time accused the late President Edgar Chagwa Lungu, of shrinking the democratic space. If you go back to the records and see how many times President Hichilema visited party structures across the country, how many times he appeared on radio, how many times he appeared on TV, and he traveled right across the country in a period of 5 years compared to today's leaders and how they've been restricted in terms of movement, you would draw one conclusion only, that the democratic space has shrunk completely during the UPND rule. So to answer your question, PK, there will be no level playing field. We have said this even to the international media, that as they come to look at the fairness or to express an opinion on whether the elections have been free and fair, they need to draw a cutoff point. When do they start analyzing these particular elections? An election is not an event. An election is actually a process. What's happening right now, the way the opposition political parties and their leaders are being treated right now, it's very clear that the elections will not be free and fair. Because we can't campaign. They are campaigning. They've tied our hands behind our backs whilst they're moving and running freely. Okay? So there's need for the international community, the cooperating partners, to take interest of what's happening now. The opposition political parties can't even attend church services before the police appear.
Would you say you've become such a political threat that your church service in Chingola would have to be surrounded by, the police that you've just mentioned, and we read about it. We didn't know to what extent, the combatant was, if I may use that loosely. Is it because you've become a political threat, or it is something else? What's your reading into this continuous perceived harassment of you in particular? And as you answer that, I want you to have at the back of your mind your supporters across the country. What should they expect?
Well, firstly, the PK, it must be understood that Tonse is a people's movement. For information of our members, Tonse now has a total of 15 registered political parties with 15 civil society organizations. So you are talking about an alliance with 30 organizations. So obviously, PK, we are not looking at a small organization. I'm proud to mention to you that Tonse is actually the largest opposition coalition in the country right now, and drawn from its membership right across the country. 15 political parties and 15 civil society organizations. Obviously, PK, that is not small. And the influence of Tonse is now being felt right across the country. We have a focused leadership, of course, led by myself as president, with many colleagues belonging to the Council of Leaders. And we are not therefore surprised that UPND has come to realize that they actually have a competitor in Tonse. The background of Tonse is very, very strong, and I think it precedes the strength of Tonse. You are aware that Tonse has been there since E24. The late President Lungu, was able to assemble political parties. They came together and formed Tonse, and it's been growing from strength to strength from that time. So yes, PK, I'm aware that the UPND are slowly becoming uncomfortable around the strengthening influence of Tonse across the country. And that's why they've resorted to, all manner of activities that would frustrate the movement of Tonse leaders.
Right. Now, your passport confiscated, your phones confiscated. Have they given you the official position why the action was undertaken? If not, what's your own perception that could have informed the decision to grab your phones, to grab your passport?
Well, running through the entire interrogation and the interviews at the airport, they were only focused on one thing. The main objective was stopping from traveling. That's all that it was. The rest of it, was just to try and cover up what the original idea was. The original idea was to make sure that I don't travel out of the country, and they could keep me around for however long they intend to do so. But like I said, there is no good reason for doing that, because the current president, when he was facing treason charges, he still had his passport. He was able to travel.
Right.
There is no crime in political leaders venturing out of the country to look for support, material, technical, even financial support. There is nothing criminal about that. Every other leader that you know does that, including President Hichilema. He got support from friends, both local and outside. So you should not make it look criminal, if the leaders of today, including the leaders in Tonse, venture out, travel out to go and look for support. Yes.
I need to just take advantage of our conversation here, and also in the interest of the public, for you to take a moment and let them in on what could have been happening behind the scenes. Because when you were detained at Ibex Hill, information emerged that they interrogated you potentially based on certain contacts you might have made. But the police themselves the following day actually charged you with cyber crime related. How do the two correlate?
Yes, like I said, the main objective was to stop me from traveling. They could have tried to concoct a number of stories, a few stories around that, but the main objective was to stop me from traveling, as it were.
Right.
Of course, the interrogation period was almost 4 hours, but most of that time they spent it going through the phones. We spoke for about an hour or slightly under, but the rest of the time was the time they spent going through the phones, and they were doing so without any warrant whatsoever.
Let me pick up on what you just said a few minutes ago, a few moments ago, where you said President Hichilema, while in opposition, he solicited for support from friends.
Yes.
And no one treated it as a criminal offense. Why should your case be different?
That's a question that only President Hichilema and the colleagues in the UPND can answer. Yeah, because they were in opposition for maybe 15, 16 years. They survived because they were assisted by friends who believed in their manifesto, friends who believed in their leadership. So as opposition political parties, we basically rely on our supporters to support our political activities. And these supporters would be those that are within the country and some of those that are outside the country. And the only way to elicit that support, sometimes they would like to engage you in person. They want to hear you. What's your manifesto? What are you going to do for the country? What will you do for the many suffering Zambians? What are you going to do for this and that? That's what opposition political parties do. That's the sort of engagement that is out there. So if today's government begins to confiscate passports from political opponents in order to ground them, that is totally unfair. Already they're beginning to shift the playing field. Already they begin to dent the playing field. And therefore, you cannot, after 3-4 months, say elections were free and fair when other people could not even move. They could not even go out there to solicit or elicit for support.
Do you think that perhaps all these activities make a strong case for Zambia to have a political parties act that would compel perhaps political players to disclose their source of funding to cure all this unnecessary suspicion? Would you, as a lawmaker yourself, do you think that perhaps we have arrived at that stage where we should be bold enough to enact such a law?
Yes, and I think we got there some time back. If you remember, the political parties bill was actually coming up for the first reading. It was our friends in the UPND that appealed to us. I was government chief whip at the time, to wait until the constitution was amended before the political parties bill could be presented. For us in Tonse, it's been our position that if you look at what happened soon after 2021, all the vehicles that belonged to the Patriotic Front were grabbed by the UPND. They did not give a reason why they grabbed those vehicles. We know that the UPND as a party also received a number of vehicles from well-wishers, as it were, because at that time, there was no law, there's still no law that stopped donors or supporters from donating to political parties. So we felt it was important that that particular legislation is enacted so that there is a regulation. Because on one hand, the UPND received vehicles and they received support, but they were able to collect vehicles from the losing political party, the parties in opposition. They did not want them to have a similar strength in terms of equipment and in terms of transport. Now, if there was a law in place, that would regulate on both ends, not in this particular case where the UPND simply used the police to collect vehicles, and we know that they've been using those vehicles for their political activities.
Now, you have been charged with cyber-related offenses such as aiding, abetting, hate speech, contrary to Section 55 and Section 65 of the Cybersecurity and Cybercrimes Act number 2 of 2021. How do you react to these charges? Do you consider them at any point politically motivated, or it's a due process that you are prepared to face?
Of course, they're politically motivated, but I stand ready, to go through the due process, because I know the end point. Really, I can only be innocent at the end of the day.
Do you feel intimidated, broken, and do you think you have it in you to carry the cross of what it takes to become president?
Yes, PK, I do. I'm more resolved now, to fight on. I may not have known to what extent our institutions had collapsed. Now I'm experiencing it. We are talking about the civil service. We are talking about state actors and the police. So I'm more resolved now to fight and ensure that we liberate this country. I am more resolved now because I've experienced it. I just narrated to you my ordeal at the airport, my ordeal at IBEX police, my ordeal at ACC and everywhere else. So I'm more resolved now, to fight and ensure that we liberate this country, to be able to have a depoliticized civil service, a depoliticized police service, a police that will belong to the state, a police that will look at continuity, not a police that would look at patronage and expedience. They must look at continuity and delivery. So as president for Tonse, in Tonse, we make one undertaking. The first thing that we will do is to ensure that we have a professional civil service. There's been a challenge, PK. Governments have changed. There's one thing that has lagged behind. The state and the civil service has remained the same. There is need now to look at the civil service seriously, to retrain the civil service, open up centers and schools that will run short clinics to educate and train civil service on patriotism, on what it is to be a civil servant and what values they must espouse to remain state officers, as it were. When I was stopped at the airport, I talked to the officers that were there. I was very frank with them. I told them that muleo naule chalo. Muleo naule chalo because you are now taking on unlawful instructions. What is expected from trained officers is that even when they are given instructions by their superiors, those instructions should be lawful. Yeah, so where we are, PK, if we don't do something about what is going on now, especially depoliticizing the civil service, ensuring that we have a professional civil service, ensuring that we have a civil service that is being sufficiently trained on patriotism and on how to protect the state and the role that the state plays in governance. Because there can only be continuity if the state remains neutral. There can only be continuity if the state remains depoliticized, as it were. So this is what our resolve is, Tonse. So to answer your question, I'm ready to carry the cross.
Right. Yeah. Now, given your personal circumstances of what you have experienced in the last 2-3 months, does that validate the strongly held perception in the court of public opinion that Zambia is facing democratic shrinking space? And if that were to be true, how do you contrast it with prior 2021 and the promises that the Zambian people were given that the UPND was going to rule by the law and respect the democracy that we have cherished for over 60 years now?
Yes, there are two things to look at, PK. We are talking about a shrinking democratic space. But most importantly, we are also talking about a collapsed governance system. We'll start from there. I'm a member of parliament, obviously, as you know. You expect a strict observance of the doctrine of separation of powers, where the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive stand as independent organs of the state. Every Zambian knows, and especially you in the media today, that we have a fused system. We have a system, there's a community of minds between the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive. And I will not be apologetic when pointing this out. So that's a starting point. You have a collapse in governance institutions. You talk about institutions under the executive, like Registrar of Societies. There are problems there every day. Registrar of Societies is now would now want to interfere with the internal functioning of political parties, something totally outside their mandate. You look at the Electoral Commission of Zambia, they would also want to function outside their mandate, outside the governing laws that created these particular institutions. So this is a confirmation, first of all, that we have the governance institutions have all collapsed, even before we come to the collapse of the democratic space. Because if the institutions of governance had not collapsed, people would have had recourse. Okay, you would have somewhere to go and complain. You'd have some ECZ to go to and complain about how the campaigns in the by-elections are being disturbed by another political party. But there's nowhere to go, okay? The violence that you experience during these by-elections, where do you complain? Where do you go? You can't go to the police. You can't go to ECZ. So as we discuss the collapse in the democratic space, we should not discuss that in isolation with the collapse of governance institutions like Electoral Commission of Zambia, the National Assembly, the judiciary, the executive, as it were. I've just given examples of the movements that you find. Ordinarily, you expect the Registrar of Societies just to be a normal institution where, as long as you meet the criteria, you should be able to register a political party. If as a political formation you decide to hold your convention and change your list of office bearers and submit to the registrar, they should be able to effect those changes. But that cannot happen because somebody else has got to be comfortable with the names that have been submitted. Yeah, so that is a confirmation that there's a total collapse of governance institutions.
Talking about the collapse of the governance system in Zambia, I'm aware, as you are, that yesterday on the floor of Parliament, a member of Parliament, Honorable George Sanga, raised the point of order, asking the Madam Speaker why certain members of Parliament are still in the House when they have publicly declared their defection.
Yes.
And that is contrary to Article 72 of our Constitution. Could you speak to that? What should have happened if those members of Parliament, 9 of them as a matter of fact, made a public undertaking? We are defecting from Party A to Party B. In fact, they've defected to the ruling party.
Yes.
Why must they be on the floor of the House? I know the Speaker said she has reserved a ruling, but what's your own understanding of the law as it should apply in a circumstance like this one?
No, the law is very clear under Article 72. The Constitution is very clear. When you defect from a political party that sponsored you to Parliament, the seat immediately becomes vacant. So there's a difference, PK. If that defection happens within 180 days before the general elections, there is no by-election that is declared. But a vacancy occurs in that particular seat.
Right.
Because you have moved from the political party that sponsored you to another political party. These defections happened a couple of weeks ago. And they're in public domain because the defections happened publicly. One would expect that Parliament, the National Assembly obviously, to take judicial notice because this was done publicly. In many cases, it was on ZNBC because they happened around the head of state and the presidency. So if anyone wanted to doubt, we are talking about the national television. So there is sufficient evidence to confirm that indeed these members of Parliament defected. We've seen Parliament move very swiftly to effect certain decisions. One of them was the removal of a leader of opposition, Honorable Brian Mundubile. A letter came that afternoon. Within the same afternoon, a decision was made and the leader of opposition was replaced. We have seen National Assembly drag its feet in certain cases affecting the opposition. That is not supposed to be the case. the legislature is supposed to be an independent organ of the state whose actions are supposed to be consistent with the standing orders or indeed the written laws. So in this particular case, the Speaker has reserved the ruling. But I can tell you, without any fear of contradiction, the ruling cannot go any other way because those particular defections happened publicly. And the black text of the law is very clear on what happens when a member of parliament defects.
Should the Speaker decide to give a blind eye to the text of the law, would she perhaps be implying that commit a crime in the presence or in the name of the president, then you are shielded from the implications of the law?
Well, to a great extent, we expect that the Speaker will remain silent until the dissolution of Parliament. But it doesn't change the facts. You know that members of Parliament draw allowances, their sitting allowances. They also draw allowances for their committee sitting. There are also certain privileges that they enjoy, be it a lodging at the motel. Of course, they also draw a salary. What must be made very clear is that regardless of how long it takes, what will be required of these members of Parliament will be to refund whatever benefits they're drawing from the time that they defected. From the time that they defected. That is expected, and then the precedents are bound. You remember what happened to ministers under President Edgar Chagolungu and the PF. They were meant to pay back. So in this particular case, it doesn't matter how long it takes. Sooner than later, it will be confirmed that according to Article 72, those members had indeed defected, and because they are defected, their seats had fallen vacant. And therefore, any benefit that they drew from the time that they defected needed to be refunded to the Zambian people.
As lawmakers in this session, last session of your sitting, I think one of the things you'll be dealing with is the electoral process bill. And there are certain proposed elements that may not be too comfortable with most stakeholders. Do you have your personal misgivings about certain things that are contained in the proposed electoral amendment bill?
Yes, PK. Obviously, I haven't paid a lot of attention to look at these amendments. I've got it now, and I want to look at it. My immediate reaction is that the process, the electoral process towards the general election has already started. One should wonder why you begin to change laws or regulations halfway through the process. A week from now, presidential candidates will be paying money to ECZ for nominations. By that time, the laws or the amendments you're referring to would not even have been effected. Can you see that? I mean, the process would have started. And
the law to govern that,
is not
available.
Is not available. Changes are being made along the way. My immediate reaction, that's why maybe I didn't even pay a lot of attention to it, but to advise ECZ to say there is no need to even bring those amendments up. It's irregular that the process starts and then you change the law. Because all those presidential candidates who are expected to start making payments next week should first of all be comfortable with the law, okay? Should be comfortable with the law before they pay. The moment they pay, we do not expect ECZ to bring about amendments that may, in the process, even disqualify some of those candidates who would have already made their commitments and their payments. Yeah, so the current laws are sufficient. President Hichilema was elected using the current laws. And remember, he came from the opposition to defeat a sitting president. So there is nothing really urgent or wrong with the current laws that would make it mandatory for these amendments to be passed before the elections.
You are on record of having called on to the international community to intervene in some of the happenings in our nation. What comes to mind, the United Nations Human Rights Commission, and others, what do you want them to do, or what role do you want them to play in internal affairs of Zambia?
Yes, it's not so much about the internal affairs, and I think the protection of human rights is very, very important. Protection of human rights is very, very important, and like I said earlier, in a constitutional democracy, there are basically two things that you look at. You are looking at contestation. You are also looking at the protection of human rights. So it's contestation and protection of human rights, as it were. So because of that, the international community is enjoined in taking particular interest to what is happening with this electoral process in the country. You are aware that the United Nations and many other stakeholders give a lot of support to Zambia towards the electoral processes, as it were. So when certain things begin to happen, because remember, even the money that is sent to this country is actually taxpayers' money from the respective countries that they're coming from. So our appeal is that if what they want to see is a free and fair election, we want to draw their attention to the many activities that have started happening prior to these elections. We are saying to the stakeholders that they should not take elections to be an event where they isolate maybe 1 week around that particular period when the elections are happening. The preparations for these elections have already started. So it's important that the stakeholders and the international community takes interest in what is happening on the road to August 13th, as it were. For instance, what's the treatment of other political parties? We've got a party in government now, the UPND, that are busy campaigning. They're all over the country, even using state assets, planes and all that. We see their cadres in and out of these helicopters, traveling and going all over the country. They're able to hold rallies, receive defectors. The vice president would leave Lusaka with government planes with the excuse that they're going to look at the victims of flood, of a disaster, some floods in Chama. When we talk to our people, or when reports come of a plane having gotten stuck, it couldn't take off, you learn of the vice president's activities to have been receiving defectors in these particular areas. So you go to Luapula, they meet with some of our supporters there. They report on the activities that the vice president and other officials are actually undertaking. So what we are saying is that there must be a level playing field. The opposition political parties equally deserve a right to meet with their party members. Remember, there are two things there, PK. The electoral calendar is out, and various processes towards this electoral process have been prescribed. So our members need to go down to the ward levels to explain what these particular dates and processes are. It's during these meetings that our members are picked and locked up at police stations. I mean, this is how grave this situation is. Members explaining or going to explain the electoral calendar to members in the lower structures, in the substructures, are picked and locked away in police cells.
Right.
When UPND goes beyond meeting party structures, they actually meet other people at political rallies, receive defectors, and nothing happens to them. So this is the attention that I would like to draw to the international community. They must be able to see the treatment of political parties and how disadvantaged these political parties are. To what extent the democratic space has shrunk in this country going forward. It's only then that they'll be able to express a fair opinion on whether the elections were free and fair or not.
Right. Now, the UPND, have gone to town. They're on record saying they're going to play Mingalato on you, opposition political parties. And we're so close to nomination. We are so close to campaign season kicking in within the next few weeks. Are you confident that as you go to make the payment for presidential nomination fees, your name will most definitely be on the ballot come August 2026?
PK, the will of the people will prevail. Ultimately, all these things that we are doing is about the Zambian people. And the will of the Zambian people will prevail. On 13th of August, including the dates when those nominations have been selected. So when you talk about Mingalato, PK, a government that governs using Mingalato is a government that has lost its legitimacy. Because when you're in government, you've got the state machinery. You have the constitution that helps you to govern. So the moment you begin to govern outside the law is because you've lost your legitimacy. So when the Minister of Information goes on TV to admit that they will now start using Imingalato Promax, that's admitting that they've actually lost their legitimacy. They have got to act outside the law to keep themselves in government, as it were. So this is what the Zambian people must pay attention to, that we have a government that is ready to go to a great extent to retain power, even when they've lost their legitimacy.
Right.
So like I said, it's the will of the people that will prevail in this particular regard.
Talking about the will of the people prevailing, given that you're not given the privilege and opportunity to interface and conduct a rally or campaign, what would be your message using this platform to your supporters, given what you're going through and the anticipated build-up of resistance, perhaps, to your being on the ballot and the fact that you have said it is the will of the people that is going to prevail? What would be your message to your supporters?
Yes, Speaker, my message to my supporters, and I have in mind, I've got the youths out there, who include students, the youths who include small-scale miners, sometimes referred to as jerabos, the youths who are selling in the markets, the youths who are hawkers on the street, trying to make ends meet, the youths in creative arts, the youths in bus stations. I'm speaking to the women in agriculture, the women in creative arts, the women out there on the street trying to make ends meet, popularly referred to as Nakulumutinta Pamakasa. I'm speaking to the civil servants out there, civil servants who are working under a very difficult situation, including the police themselves. I'm speaking to the politicians, fellow politicians. My message to all, I am saying, stand firm. You need to be strong, you need to be brave, and stand for what is correct. The civil servants, you are looking at Tonse as a redeemer. Tonse is coming with debt swap. Tonse is coming to look at your specific challenges. We cannot have a situation where government owes citizens in the name of civil servants. These civil servants, in desperation, are forced to go out there and accrue debt from Shylocks. And the government looks away after promising that they would actually swap this particular debt. Tonse is not apologetic about that. We want to look at the welfare of the civil servants. It's through these civil servants that the Tonse manifesto will be implemented, translated into government policy, and be able to improve the lives of the Zambian people. So the civil servants, being part of the machinery that will transform this country, we will consider them first as stakeholders in this particular case. To the youths in mining, I say to you that through Tonse, will ensure that we formalize that particular sector, small-scale miners. You look forward to a government that will look at ensuring that you own some basic equipment that you're going to use for mining. This government will ensure that you will have an aggregator in your area that will be able to pay value for whatever you're producing, as it were. The same will apply to the youths in agriculture. We have youths in agriculture that are growing tomatoes, for instance, and we have tomatoes going to waste every day at Soweto. Now, under Tonse, this government will ensure that there's an aggregator for those agricultural products to be able to reward you for your efforts so that the tomatoes are not thrown or littered all around Soweto. You've grown your tomatoes. There must be a system, there will be a system that will absorb your product, as it were. The same will apply to those that are rearing chickens. Look at the demand for chickens just across the borders. Congo receives over 500 trucks of frozen chicken from Brazil, whilst the youths are losing money from the chickens that they would have kept when they go to the markets at Soweto. All you need is a government that cares, a leadership that cares and is able to complement the efforts that these youths are making. There are many businesses, PK, if you go to the Copper Belt, starting from Undola, you go right through. Most of those companies, these are companies that were manufacturing parts. These are companies that were supporting the mines in many aspects. They're unable to do so because they don't have a government that is able to guarantee some business for them. The government under Tonse will guarantee local content for up to 50%. Whatever business is happening around the mining sector, 50% of it is guaranteed for the local companies. The complexion of the Copper Belt PK will change completely. Look, there is over close to $5 billion worth of business on the Copper Belt. So by guaranteeing 50% of it, there's $2.5 billion to local companies. So the complexion, the business environment on the Copper Belt will change completely. So this is what we have to say, to our supporters.
In a way, you've, given an overview of what your manifesto is promising to deliver to the Zambian people. But lastly, what do you think has been the failure of the UPND administration based on which you want the Zambian people to replace them with you? What are some of the highlights that you think warrant the UPND being kicked out of power come August 13?
Well, first of all, let's just pick sectors randomly. Look at the health sector, a very important sector. The health sector has collapsed. NIMA, a very important health insurance program, has collapsed completely. The procurement system in the health sector collapsed completely. Let's go to agriculture. The agriculture sector has collapsed completely because the farmers now, first of all, are owed money for the maize that they supplied, and they're given medals. They used to receive 6 bags of fertilizer, they now receive medal. Okay, so we talk about infrastructure. If you look at the infrastructure sector now, you can't point to any new houses for the police, the army, immigration officers, or public servants, as it were. All you get is a transfer of toll gates, okay? A transfer of toll gates to a concessionaire. When you look at the quality of these roads under the PPP, Minister Milupi has been on the floor before, floor of parliament, to say they came to mend or work on the poor roads that were constructed by the PF. The roads that are collapsing are roads that have been constructed under the UPND, PK, okay? You go to Luwingu Mansa Road, that road is over 10 years old. 13, 14 years, it's still standing. Okay, go to Mbala Nakonde Road, you're still going to find that road standing. These are roads that are over 10 years. The roads that were built 2 years ago are being washed away. Go and look at even the dual carriageway, the Ndola Lusaka dual carriageway. We came I came on your program, PK, and I raised an issue. This is 2 years ago. The issue was that these PPP projects, can Minister Milupi explain to us how he has allowed the contractors to proceed with constructing critical sections of that road without a consultant? There was no consultant on that road for a year, and EIZ could not raise these issues. PK, if you've been on any road project, if a consultant goes for a funeral that day to bury his aunt, he basically asks you to suspend works on a particular section because he would like to verify the quality of the materials that you're using, including stone, cement, bitumen, every material that you're going to use on a particular road. Now imagine that you allow a contractor to be on the road for a year and complete critical sections of that road, including bridges, without a consultant. Why should you then be surprised? Why should Minister Milupi today be surprised that bridges are being washed away on that particular road? Why should the Minister Milupi, Minister of Infrastructure, who is supposed to be an engineer himself, why should he be surprised that sections are failing on most of that road? The answer is simple. There's been no consultant on that road. There was no verification on the quality of the materials. Now, Zambians must take interest. These are Zambian roads. These are public roads. The money that we are paying the concessionaire is money that belongs to the Zambian people. The quality of these roads should be a concern for every Zambian that has seen these roads collapse. So when we say corruption will not come by way of giving or receiving of bribes, okay, it will involve all actions that sometimes prioritize private interest over and above public interest. It will come by way of legislation, by way of administration, and by way of policy. So some of these key decisions that are made, the question that I'd want the Zambian people to ask, why was it that the Road Development Agency and the Ministry of Infrastructure allowed for the construction of critical sections or allowed critical works on that particular road to be carried out without a consultant? That's a big question. Yeah, so I'm answering your question.
Right.
Yeah, we've talked about agriculture, we've talked about health, we have talked about infrastructure, we've talked about mining. What success stories are there, PK? There is no success story. And if you interrogate these particular sectors, you will realize why there's a problem in each of these sectors. With our colleagues, the focus are on numbers. The difference with Tonse, the focus will be on a Zambian called Nakulumutinta Pankasa. The policies flowing from our manifesto in relation to these sectors, when we are talking, for instance, about fertilizer distribution, there will be Nakulumutinta Pamakasa. Now, we will not look at fertilizer distribution in isolation. We will look at the accessibility. The trucks that are distributing fertilizers must get as close as possible to Nakulumutinta, who should be able to pick fertilizers on a wheelbarrow and be able to deliver. We will look at the yield, the productivity of Nakulumutinta and ensure that she doesn't get less than 6 bags, as it were. Now, with the UPND, all these policies were crafted in a vacuum without a Zambian at the center. So if you ask me, the difference that will make when we're crafting policies in the mining sector, I've just given an example about the local content. There's a Zambian right at the center that should be able to benefit from these particular policies. If we talk about small-scale mining and why we should formalize that particular sector and help them with equipment, we've got a youth who's a Zambian in that particular sector.
Right.
So that's the difference that we will make. We'll have a Zambian in mind. And every Zambian in this particular case should count. That's why we pick on the most vulnerable in society, who in this case is Nakulumutinta Pamakasa. It's because we want every Zambian to count.
That's Tonse Alliance presidential candidate for 2026. That's Honorable Brian Mundubile. And we've been looking at the opposition leaders, whether or not they are under political persecution. Thank you so much for coming to State of the Nation.
Thank you very much, Doc. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Right. So on behalf of my producer, Patricia Kumbuyo, and my field technician, Peter Chintala, I remain Kenneth Mambwe. The Lord bless you and keep you until next time. Bye-bye.